We're unpacking the book of Habakkuk. But right off the bat, I need you to completely wipe away any idea of a static, dusty, boring religious lecture. Okay? Because what we actually have here in this ancient text is a highly dramatic, unfolding conversation. It is this incredibly bold, back-and-forth dialogue between a desperate prophet and the creator of the universe.
Okay, let's dive into this. The beating heart of this entire book is a question that is literally echoed through centuries, right into our modern lives. If God is perfectly just, why on earth does he allow evil to persist? I mean, it's a universally relatable question, isn't it? We've all asked it, and it is exactly the question that drives the intense narrative we're about to explore together.
Section 1. A prophet's bold complaint. To really understand this complaint, we have to set the scene. Imagine it. We are in the late 7th century BC, in the kingdom of Judah. It is a really dark, chaotic time. Sure, the temple of God is still standing in Jerusalem, but the spiritual decay is just undeniable. Violence, injustice, and bitter conflict are running completely rampant through the streets. The wicked seem to be winning, and justice seems totally silent. And it's right here, right in the middle of this massive mess, that the prophet Habakkuk steps up. You see, unlike other prophets, who usually start by telling the people what God says, Habakkuk starts by telling God what he thinks. He boldly brings his confusion directly to God's front door. He doesn't hide his pain behind polite, flowery religious language. He demands to know, "How long, Lord? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are right in front of me." He is watching his society collapse, and he wants to know why a just God is just standing by.
Section 2. God's shocking first answer. Now, in a lot of ancient stories, questioning a deity like this would get you struck by a lightning bolt, right? But God actually responds to Habakkuk's cries. He tells him to look at the nations and be utterly amazed. God says, basically, I haven't been ignoring this. I'm already taking action. But God's answer is entirely unexpected, and honestly, it is terrifying. He reveals that his plan for justice involves raising up the Chaldeans. Now, for some quick context, the Chaldeans are the fierce, powerful, rapidly expanding Babylonian Empire. They were known across the ancient world as this ruthless, impetuous people who just marched across the earth, seizing lands that didn't belong to them. They were, without a doubt, the ultimate ancient war machine.
And this brilliantly illustrates Habakkuk's horrific realization. On the left side here, we have his first problem, right? The localized spiritual corruption and violence of his own people in Judah. But then, over on the right, we have God's supposed solution, an apocalyptic, ruthless, world-conquering threat. So Habakkuk's problem wasn't solved at all. Actually, scratch that. It was entirely eclipsed by something massively more terrifying.
Section 3. The second, harder question.
This brings us to a really crucial pivot in the dialogue. Habakkuk's initial confusion about why God wasn't doing anything suddenly deepens into this massive theological crisis. He has to grapple with the shocking implications of God's plan. So, he goes right back to God, and you can practically feel the dramatic tension in his words. Habakkuk knows God's character. He knows God is perfectly holy. So he asks, "Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves?" Seriously, how could a perfectly holy, righteous God possibly use a pagan, hyper-violent nation like Babylon to punish his own people? It simply does not compute for him.
Section 4. The Watchtower and the Weight. So, facing a theological wall that makes absolutely zero sense, you might expect Habakkuk to just walk away in total despair, throw his hands up, and quit. But instead, he does something profound. He intentionally positions himself to listen. I just love the incredibly rich picture this verse paints. Imagine the prophet standing entirely alone on a high, desolate watchtower, looking out over a broken, corrupt city. He absolutely refuses to succumb to panic, and he refuses to let go of God. He chooses to wait in the silence for divine clarity. He brings his hardest, most painful complaints, and then he simply waits.
And sure enough, God speaks again. He tells Habakkuk to write down the vision so that anyone can read it. But notice this. God's immediate answer isn't a detailed step-by-step blueprint of all his cosmic plans. No, it's a command to trust that his timing is never wrong. God is essentially saying, "My plan is set. Even if it feels delayed, wait for it."
Section 5. The Righteous Live by Faith. And let me just say, we have now arrived at the absolute climax of our explainer today.
This concept right here isn't just the turning point of their dialogue, it is the theological core of the entire book of Habakkuk, and a massive foundation stone for Christian belief. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how God draws a sharp, brilliant contrast here. On one hand, you have the Babylonian Empire,
puffed up, arrogant, trusting entirely in their own military might and stolen wealth. On the other hand, you have the defining mark of true, enduring Christian belief. The righteous person will live by their faithfulness.
God makes it crystal clear that He is utterly sovereign over history. Babylon is just a tool for a moment, but make no mistake, they will be held accountable. God pronounces 5 terrible woes, or judgments, against Babylon. For their greed, their bloodshed, their oppression, and their worship of lifeless idols, they are going to face the ultimate judge. Their earthly power is strictly temporary, but God's divine justice is eternal. All that wealth they violently labored for, it will ultimately turn to ashes.
So the crucial point is this. True faith doesn't mean you perfectly understand the why of your circumstances. It doesn't mean you can clearly see exactly how all the puzzle pieces of history fit together. Faith is trusting deeply in God's holy character, even when His actions in the moment are completely beyond our human comprehension.
Section 6. Rejoicing in the ruins.
After hearing God's ultimate plan, we reach the final chapter, which is framed as this beautiful poetic prayer. Now, keep in mind, Habakkuk doesn't get a promise of immediate peace here. The Babylonian invasion is absolutely still coming. But internally, his heart is completely transformed. He stops staring at the impending doom, and he looks back at the majesty and faithfulness of God. He begins to describe a hypothetical worst-case scenario, though the fig tree does not bud. This isn't just a slightly bad season. This is the beginning of total agricultural and economic devastation.
Let's move to the next image and see how this builds a picture of everything a society relies upon slowly stripping away. The vines are totally bare. Everything an ancient agrarian society relies upon for joy, for trade, and for basic survival is just gone.
The environment is actually getting worse, not better, and the impending Babylonian invasion will leave the land utterly desolate. The olive crops, which were essential for oil, light, and food, they fail completely. The fields are completely barren.
No sheep in the pen, no cattle in the stalls. Let's just pause right here for a second and let that absolute physical emptiness and ruin sink in. Habakkuk is envisioning a world where every single visible blessing has been removed. The economy has collapsed, and starvation is literally at the door. But look at his response. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord, I will be joyful in God my Savior. Wow, this is unbelievable. This is for sure one of the most powerful, defiant declarations of faith in all of biblical literature. His joy is no longer tied to whether his environment is thriving. His joy is anchored directly to the eternal, unchanging nature of God Himself.
And then he finishes with this incredibly beautiful visual metaphor. Just as a deer navigates treacherous, jagged, dizzying mountain heights without slipping, God gives us stability in chaotic times. God is the one who empowers us to walk securely through the absolute darkest, most terrifying landscapes of history.
We can bring this ancient truth right into our modern lives, right now. The message of Habakkuk for believers today is that faith is not a reward for finally figuring God out. Faith is trusting Him when we still do not understand. When the world around us feels entirely chaotic, when justice seems completely inverted, we can anchor ourselves not to our changing circumstances, but to the holy, just, and sovereign character of God.